The illegal narcotics industry pulls in hundreds of billions of dollars each year, capitalizing on the people who are dependent on their product. In New York City alone, an estimated $16 million are spent each week by consumers looking to get that next high. And it's the cartels south of the border who are profiting from it all big time. Since the 80s, Colombian and Mexican cartels have thrived. With their success has come extreme cruelty, political corruption, and stories of excess and burnout. Welcome back to Weirdly Interesting. Today, we dive into some crazy secrets you probably didn't know about the cartels. Los Zetas Communications Network. One of the most powerful cartels in Mexico during the 2000s and 2010s was Los Zetas. They also managed to build an extensive radio tower network that stretched from the Texas border all the way down to Mexico's border with Guatemala. They reportedly started the process around 2006. Los Zetas and other cartels rely on two-way walkie-talkies for their lower-level employees to communicate amongst each other, often tuning them to frequencies that aren't used by truckers, police, or anyone else who might possibly listen in. The radios were most often used by halcones, cartel lookouts who patrol the streets and inform higher-ups about the movements of police, military personnel, and rival cartel members. To beef up and secure their communications network, Los Zetas decided to start building their own network of radio towers. Some were secretly attached to existing towers. Others were built in more remote areas, including the middle of dense jungles, in order to facilitate communications over long distances between cities. Many of the towers were either painted green to camouflage them in the jungles or ran on the green energy of solar panels. Even the cartels were more progressive in certain ways than many oil and gas guzzling populations. In order to build this vast communications network, Los Zetas did something not so progressive though. Between 2006 and 2009, 36 engineers were taken, disappeared without a trace. One worked for IBM, others worked for well-known Mexican communications companies. These engineers were clearly taken to be forced to work on the network of towers. They were never ransomed, and none have ever been heard of since. There was a huge bust in 2011 when hundreds of the towers were discovered and shut down. Yet the network still exists. In one report from 2018, a contractor accidentally deactivated one of the Zetas antennas that they had snuck onto a tower. He was met shortly after by a group of cartel members who threatened him but let him off with a warning. These parasite antennas, as they're called, are still helping Los Zetas coordinate and communicate, despite efforts to eliminate them. Cartel boss loved John Lennon and Hitler. Carlos Letter was a prolific smuggler who eventually became one of the most senior-ranking bosses in Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel. Letter was born in Colombia to German parents who were Nazi sympathizers and had fled to Colombia before the outbreak of World War II. He eventually emigrated to New York City, where he was arrested for car theft. In prison, he met George Young. Cut to a montage from the movie Blow, and you pretty much have the rest of the story. The two revolutionized the narcotics trade from Colombia to the US, using private jets to transport the illicit drugs in huge quantities, earning billions for Escobar and the Medellin cartel. Eventually, Letter purchased his own island, Norman's Key, 200 miles southeast of Miami. The private island became a midway point for the cartel's smuggling operations. On the island, Letter went pretty nuts. He would have huge parties and ruled the island with a megalomaniacal fervor that probably would have made the Führer himself cringe. On the island, Letter began to develop his own neo-Nazi group and began setting his sights on running for office in Colombia. By 1980, the DEA was onto him, and Letter had to flee his island playground and go back to Colombia. In 1982, he formed a neo-Nazi party called the National Latin Movement and began holding press conferences and buying ad space in Colombian newspapers. In addition to his admiration of Hitler, Letter was also obsessed with John Lennon. While it may seem like an unlikely combination of idols, Letter appreciated Lennon's criticism of American politics and opposition to the Vietnam War. So he had a giant statue of the Beatle installed in front of his Colombian compound. By 1987, Letter had burned his bridges with Escobar, who gave him up to Colombian authorities. When they raided Letter's compound, they found an entire room filled with Hitler and Nazi memorabilia. The kingpin was extradited to the United States, where he spent 33 years in federal prison and was released in 2020. Narco corridos. As if the cartels didn't receive enough promotion from TV and movies, they also have their own musical genre. Many musicians in Mexico and the southern United States sing narco corridos, or narco ballads, praising certain cartels and kingpins, describing the life of narco smugglers, or celebrating the violence of illicit lifestyles. Some popular ballads include a tribute to El Chapo Guzman, the infamous Sinaloa cartel kingpin, To My Enemies by prolific narco ballad composer Valentin Elizalde, and the Ballad of the Zetas composed for the aforementioned Los Zetas cartel. Other more graphic narco corridos have emerged in recent years as part of the Movimiento Alterado subgenre. They sing about gang wars, high-powered weaponry, and anything that makes the cartel more feared. One such song has been dedicated to the notorious Sinaloa cartel enforcer Manuel Torres Felix. Some of the lyrics are too disturbing to get into, but suffice it to say, they paint a pretty picture of the notorious kingpin. The genre has been around since the 80s, and despite attempts by some radio stations to ban the songs, the music has continued to be popular, both amongst the general public and within the cartels themselves. However, narco corridistas, those who sing the narco ballads, need to be careful about what they write about. They're always in danger of drawing the ire from rival cartels who don't like their lyrics. Over the years, a number of narco corridistas have disappeared because they rubbed certain cartels the wrong way. One of the most famous narco corridistas, Valentin Elizalde, was taken out in his car after a concert in 2006. He had written a song which antagonized the Zetas cartel, and it's believed that a Zetas hitman was responsible. Elizalde was 27, joining the infamous 27 Club with the likes of Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix, and Amy Winehouse. In 2007, he was even nominated for a posthumous Grammy Award. The Acapulco Summit. By 1978, a few prominent Mexican capos teamed up to form the Guadalajara Cartel. Headed up by infamous kingpin Felix Gallardo, the Guadalajara Cartel became one of the first Mexican organizations to start working with the Colombians to traffic their foreign product from South America through Mexico and into the United States. However, the Guadalajara Cartel wasn't the organized juggernaut it's been portrayed as in the media and in the movies. It was actually a pretty loose organization of families with a whopping 62 leadership structures across Mexico. The name itself, the Guadalajara Cartel, was actually given in the early 80s by the DEA, as they were trying to figure out who was controlling the narcotics trade and what their networks were like. Then, in 1989, the Mexican government snagged Gallardo at a restaurant in Guadalajara without firing a shot. After his arrest, the remaining capos met at a resort in Acapulco, where they agreed to redistribute the territory once occupied, albeit loosely, by Gallardo and the Guadalajara Cartel. It didn't work out though. Feuds erupted and territorial disputes eventually led to the fracturing of the Mexican narcotics landscape, and multiple cartel rivals emerged that would become seriously messy throughout the 90s and 2000s. The Lost Decade? The 1980s was a tough time for the Mexican economy. It was called La Década Perdida, or the Lost Decade. 800,000 jobs were lost. The president at the time, Carlos Salinas, instituted policies that dispossessed local farmers of their land and created a Mexican super-rich ruling class. In 1987, just one Mexican was on the Forbes billionaire list. By 1994, when Salinas left office, there were 24. The North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which went into effect in 1994, further hurt small subsistence farmers in Mexico. U.S. agribusiness pushed the prices of staple crops like corn way down, and many farmers had to abandon their lands and find work in the cities, oftentimes in U.S.-owned factories near the border. Huge slums developed in Mexico City, Tijuana, and Juarez City. Suddenly, the cartels had a huge pool of recruits to draw from, as those without jobs were drawn to the quick money of drug smuggling. As trade between the United States and Mexico increased with NAFTA, so did border traffic. More traffic meant it was easier to sneak narcotics over the border as border control struggled with the influx. There were also factories called maquiladoras, which were largely exempt from trade tariffs and subject to minimal inspections when trucks transporting their products crossed the border. The cartels took advantage of this and often would use these factories as narcotic fronts. What other shocking cartel facts do you want to know about? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more weirdly interesting content.